And I said, well, we might be the next Orson Welles. We don't know. We've never done anything. We might be Orson Welles, or we might be a bunch of idiots. Because although I was enjoying my time with Ricky, I feared he might get us both fired. You only get a chance to make your first thing once. Don't try and second guess what someone will want. Do what you want it to be, and have comedy in one scene and then try and pull at the heartstrings in the next. And that sort of is representative of life to me. When I go into projects now, I'm much more stressed than I ever was on The Office, because I know what's coming. I know what's coming down the pipe.
Hello and welcome to the BIFA podcast, supported by Kia. Hosted by me, Joy Hunter.
And me, Karis, Aldridge. Each week we'll be talking to a brand new guest about their journey into film, their most inspiring cinema-going experiences, and what makes independent film so special.
Yeah, we've basically convinced the British Independent Film Awards to let us fangirl over our favourite filmmakers.
Exactly. And this week, our guest is...
Stephen Merchant. We've bagged Merchant.
So exciting. Honestly, it feels a bit surreal that we got to see him. But he is the co-creator and director of The Office.
Yeah, he basically needs no introduction. Like, he's one of the most influential comedy writers around. And yeah, of course, we nerded out about The Office, which was amazing. We talked
really
about the short film that led to the creation of The Office, which was so exciting. He shared a lot of writing advice, which was really cool.
Yeah, and just a bunch of really fun anecdotes about, being in the industry, writing, his process, all the crazy people that he's worked with in the past. I mean, working with Florence, Pugh and Jack Loudon on Fighting With My Family, which came out, I think, 2019.
Absolutely wild stories from him. It was amazing. So please do enjoy our chat with the incredible Stephen Merchant. Stephen Merchant, thank you so much for joining us on the BIFA podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We'd love to kick off by asking, what's the first film you remember watching?
I remember going to a cinema in Bristol, where I'm from, and seeing The Empire Strikes Back.
Ooh, nice.
Which I think was probably 81. I would have been, 8 or something? And I remember being very enthralled. I don't know that I knew what was going on particularly, or even that, I don't know that I'd seen the first one actually. Because in those days, you couldn't, in the late 70s, early 80s, you couldn't just, catch up before you went to the cinema, unless it happened to be on TV or something. But I just remember being dazzled by just the experience, the lights going down and the music and I don't think it even needed to be a Star Wars film. I think just anything, I would have been just kind of equally enthralled by the sort of experience of it. And I remember seeing, around that time, a revival of Snow White and other kind of classic kind of kids friendly films, and just being and E.T. I remember queuing around the block to watch E.T. and and just being completely enamored of the whole ceremony of going to the cinema. And that's never left me, which is great.
The communal experience, there's nothing like it. There really isn't. Is there a specific local cinema in Hanham, where you're from in Bristol, that you remember going to?
Well, Hanham itself didn't have a cinema, and there was a handful of cinemas in Bristol, and I used to pay them all a visit regularly. And then they built a large view cinema, but because of where I lived, I had to get a couple of buses, and then I had to walk dangerously along a dual carriageway that didn't have any kind of pavement.
Right.
So it's just like dodging cars was the kind of
Fun
passion
game.
I had to go and see, Men in Black 2. You know what I mean? I risked my life, Will Smith, to see Men in Black 2. And I remember during Men in Black 2, in fact, at the View Cinema, I don't want to throw them under the bus, but the sound and the picture weren't aligned. And
So
no
annoying.
one was complaining, and I went and complained. I'm like, what's going on here?
I think it's crazy. That's happened to me before, and it's so insane that people will just sit there. And
I've been in cinemas all over the world, and I've ended up having to complain. I was in New Orleans, and I complained during a film. And anyway, so I complained and to the manager, and the manager came and he went, and he sort of looked at me, and I don't know how old I was, but he said, "How many do you want?" And I went, "What?" And he just got a big reel of tickets, free tickets from his pocket. He went, "I'll give you 5. Shut up, go over." I was like, bingo.
Okay.
So now I'm always looking for flaws in any screening
of course.
now.
Nice.
In
Oh
the
my
hope I
God.
get some more free shit.
I'm going to have to try that. I've never tried that tactic.
I don't know if I got free
Maybe it
tickets.
doesn't
I need
happen
to
as
be a bit
much.
more assertive, maybe.
Right, but I'm wondering if maybe it doesn't happen as much in the digital projection age. Maybe when it was film and it got maybe out of sync more. I'm not sure.
Because
I'm
it's
not
easily
sure, but
rectified.
Probably, you'd think so,
ish.
wouldn't you?
Yeah,
Switch
true.
it on and switch it off again or whatever.
Right? That's how it all works.
Yeah. We're very technical on this podcast. So
Yeah.
and was it one of those films you were watching that kind of lit the spark for you and inspired you into wanting to go into film and TV writing and creating as a career?
Well, I was a big fan of film and TV from a young age, from that Empire Strikes Back moment, and that was largely something I did a lot with my dad. We weren't a sporty family. We weren't out bike riding. We were just in, curtains drawn on a summer's day, watching films, watching telly.
My kind of family.
Yeah, and so we watched, and often that would be like classic golden era Hollywood, 40s, 50s films, because that was my dad's sort of favorite stuff. And then I started discovering, and there was a series on BBC Two called Movie Drome that this filmmaker called Alex Cox hosted, where he would show a kind of curated selection of cult movies.
Oh, cool.
And that was fantastic because, again, we're talking about like the 80s and early 90s or whatever, where it just wasn't as easy to find stuff. You just couldn't go on a streaming service and dig something out. So you sort of needed to be introduced to it either because of like a repertory cinema reviving films, or recommendations from friends, or a really good video shop. And he would curate them, and he would have all sorts of eclectic films, 50s films like I think Touch of Evil I remember seeing, but then he'll have The Warriors, and a kind of interesting selection of sometimes international films. And so you just started getting exposed to the stuff I wasn't watching with the family. But the thing which I remember turned the corner for me was I actually started reviewing films for a local magazine in Bristol.
Oh, nice.
And I was still a student, and they would send me to the films that proper film reviewers didn't want to bother seeing. So I saw a lot of crap, but they sent me to a film called Swingers, directed by Jon Favreau with Vince Vaughn, and that I remember watching that thinking, oh my God, I could have made this. I don't mean that in a negative way. I just meant it felt like it was a bunch of friends. They'd got together. It was low budget. They'd hustled. Their friends were in the movie. They were making the movie, and it felt not only did it sort of speak to me because I was of a slightly similar age, but also it just felt doable and achievable. And that was one where I really thought, I think I could take a stab at this. And I'm pleased to have been able to work with Vince Vaughn since, and directed him in my wrestling film, Fighting with My Family. And it was nice to just be able to sort of go full circle in a way.
Wow.
Did you tell him that anecdote?
I did. Yeah.
And what did he say about the experience of making the movie? Was that your assumption correct, that it was just kind of them banding together?
I'd probably read and heard so much about it by that point that I'm not even sure I pummeled him with questions.
Yeah, fair enough.
Or it's, if you're on set, invariably, just as you start to get an interesting anecdote, they'll say, "We're ready for you," and you never get to hear the end of it.
Yeah, well, we're not just hanging out, we're actually trying to
exactly,
do
we're
some
trying to
work.
make something here.
Yeah. I think that development of your taste is obviously such an important, integral part of like becoming a writer later. Were there things that you were looking for specifically when you were reviewing? Like what was your like criteria for revieving films at that time?
I don't think I ever took it quite that seriously, because I think it was always more fun to review a bad film.
Yeah.
Because you could be mean in a way that I never would be now. But at the time that was gleeful. But the only thing I've always tried to maintain is I think you need to review the movie on its own terms. You know what I mean? And so sometimes I think there can be a snobbishness in some reviewers because either they expected something different or they're judging it against their own taste. And it's like, well, no, the film is the film. And if it's trying to be a schlocky, if it's trying to be, I Know What You Did Last Summer, it's I Know What You Did Last Summer. And and so does it work on its own terms, and you're not necessarily comparing it with even the best of that genre, with The Exorcist or whatever, maybe you're comparing it with Scream, in which case it falls slightly short, but it's still a great film. It's still a really very entertaining slasher of its kind, So that was always my criteria, is judge it, based on what it's trying to do.
And you were getting into comedy at that time as well. Were there any big comedy films that had a huge influence on you going into comedy?
The comedy influence was probably more in the TV world. I was sort of had that dual passion of TV and films. And with films, I tended to be more seduced by, initially it was sort of the blockbusters when I was younger, Ghostbusters and the like. And then later, I was sort of young in that great golden period of like 90s independent cinema when Tarantino exploded onto the scene, and being at college and Trainspotting was an event. I mean, we all went to see Trainspotting. It was a big evening out, and so I think that became that was very exciting. And they often had humor, but there was something more, I don't know, there was an irreverence, or there was something, you probably didn't see stuff like that on TV at the time. TV was still a bit more sort of censorious, whereas you were seeing drugs and swearing and sex and all the rest of it. And whereas TV comedy was a whole separate passion, which I'd had again through my dad, and starting with great comedy from the 70s and 80s, and watching stand-up comedy and starting to get into that and seeing stand-up comedians. Some
of the greatest comedies kind of toe that line between comedy and tragedy, don't they? There's sort of an element of that running throughout your work, I'd say. How do you find sort of finding that balance when you're like writing?
Well, if we speak for long enough, there's a film that's going to come up again and again and again, which is Billy Wilder's The Apartment from the early 60s, which is sometimes labelled a rom-com, although some people forget that the Shirley MacLaine character tries to take her own life halfway through. So it's quite a dark film in many ways, and it's also there's a lot of kind of sleazy men exploiting the various women in their lives and exploiting the Jack Lemmon character, who's also sort of complicit. And so it's often thought of as a rom-com or as a comedy, and it certainly works as that, and it has a very beautiful romantic ending, but it has some very dark moments and themes and tones in it, and it shifts between those very elegantly. And that's always been a touchstone for me, in that you can have comedy in one scene and then hopefully try and pull at the heartstrings in the next, and that sort of is representative of life to me, is that life can, we can be having a fun chat, and then I can go outside and get mugged, and I'll be coming back here furious, going, where have you brought me to? So I've always been interested in that, that juxtaposition.
I think that's very prevalent in your work, and you do it so incredibly well.
Well, thank you. And I think it's actually more and more common now, particularly in TV, than it used to be. I think TV used to be very demarcated. It was a sitcom, it was a drama, it was a police thriller, whereas I think now the genres are blending and sort of mutating much more interestingly than
I think commissioners used to be quite scared of using the word like hybrid genre. They'd be like, oh, we can't touch that, that's you can't put that in a box. But actually that's where some really interesting work comes to the fore.
Well, in America it was, if you said they'd say, is it a half hour or an hour? And if it was a half hour, it was a comedy, and if it was an hour, it was a drama. And it was like, well, could you do a half hour drama? What are you talking about? Whereas now, you'll see streaming shows that are 42 minutes long, and they're a thriller, and a comedy that's an hour, and it's there's sort of those rules have kind of fallen away.
Yeah, breaking convention a bit.
Yeah.
So if we turn back the dial a little bit to the late 90s, when you were watching all the Tarantino films, you were being interviewed by a certain Ricky Gervais for, was it an assistant head of speech role at XFM?
Yes.
What were your first impressions of one another?
I think we just sort of hit it off very quickly. I think by the end of the interview, he was working at a radio station and he needed an assistant. He didn't need an assistant, but he wanted an assistant. And I happened to have sent my CV in, and he'd seen it. And we sort of went out for a beer. Like, that was the interview. That was the job interview, and we hit it off, and we just finally had a very kind of like-minded sensibility, and liked a lot of the same things, and so we were very simpatico very quickly. Yeah, it didn't take very long. So
there wasn't a specific point where you realised that your writing styles and your comedy blended well together. It was more natural, kind of.
Yeah, I think so. I think initially we were behind the scenes on the radio, and then we started popping up on the air, and we would kind of goof around with little bits and pieces that we'd come up with. That seemed to work. And then we started hosting a show together, and again, there was just a kind of easy rapport. And then I ended up jumping ship and joining the BBC as a trainee. Because although I was enjoying my time with Ricky, I feared he might get us both fired on account of us.
I think that's a fair, reasonable thing to think.
We just weren't doing a lot of work.
Yeah, I listened to that XFM show a lot growing up, but I can kind of understand why you might have that fear. And I say that with love of the show.
Yeah, but we definitely were always weaving a delicate line. And so I got this job at the BBC as a trainee, and then I got a camera team one day, and they said, well, as part of your training exercise, here's a camera team, go and make a documentary about your local barber shop or your local, whatever, car wash. And I said, well, can I do a fake documentary instead with my friend? And that's what became a prototype of The Office. And so that was, I think, the first time where it really, something kind of really magical happened, where we thought, oh, hang on, there's a real alchemy here.
That was CD Boss.
Well, it became, yes, I think it might have just been called The Boss.
Oh, okay.
And then somewhere on the line, it became The Office. Again, I think nowadays, probably these things would find they'd probably find an early life online.
Yeah.
But then we didn't have the opportunity. So it kind of just started getting passed around the BBC and then to other TV stations and Channel 4, and someone there had seen it. And it just sort of gathered a sort of an industry interest before it was ever seen by anybody. I don't know I think at the time, just the BBC had enough money to take a chance on a couple of chancers. And I remember going into a meeting kind of early on, and they said, so how do you see this working? And I said, well, Ricky will be in it and we'll write it and we'll direct it. And the BBC executive said, you'll do all of that, will you? And I said, well, you don't know, we might be the next Orson Welles. Yes. And at the time, but I didn't mean it arrogantly. I meant we don't know.
Yeah.
We've never done anything. We might be Orson Welles, or we might be a bunch of idiots, but we don't know. No one knows. And it's that sort of, that inadvertent arrogance of youth where you just don't even realise what you're saying.
Oh, I mean, it worked out.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That it's not really arrogance, given that it was like so
based in
deeply
facts.
Vindicated.
Well,
with the success of the show.
But I mean, I remember the first few weeks of filming, the producers came to us and they said, we can't shoot this much tape. You're just shooting like 4 times more than anyone ever shoots. We literally can't afford it. And because we didn't know, so we were just shooting every angle in every size, and also in a documentary style.
Yeah, because it was a single camera setup, which is kind of the first of its kind.
Footage.
Yeah.
And were you finding the characters sort of through improvising when you had the cameras, or did you have like a tight script down, ready to go? What was the process like?
There was a playfulness, but it sort of came out. It came out the box pretty much as it was. It didn't. It was sort of. That's what I mean about that alchemy. It didn't take. We wrote a pilot which became a bit too sitcom-y.
Yeah.
And that never got aired, and we got jumpy. We thought, well, I think this is starting to feel too much like a sitcom, and then we pulled back to what we'd started with, which was just something which we hope felt more like a real documentary. And I was traveling on a train after the first episode aired, and obviously I wasn't in it, so these 2 women who were on the train didn't know who I was, and one of them said, did you see that documentary last night about an office? The boss in it is hilarious. And the other woman said, oh no, I don't think that's a documentary, I think that's a sitcom. So the first woman said, oh, well, it wasn't very funny then. I'm like, well, that's not fair, you were laughing just now.
Yeah.
But we kind of liked the fact that some people just stumbled across it and they didn't know who anyone was in it, and they did think it was a documentary. And it became, which again is very hard to do now, because I just think social media can react so instantly to stuff, and also people tend to find things at their own pace. It's rare that something can kind of have a sort of overnight impact. Not that The Office did, to be fair. That was a very slow burn.
Yeah, it was a bit of a slow burn, and then as more and more people found it, it obviously got such gravity around it and so many fans. Do you think that's that sort of amount of time that it can take for like people to regularly see something and fall in love with the show has kind of gone away now in this like new instantaneous age of social media and like TikTok sketches? It seems like the landscape and breaking in has like transformed so much. We'd love to get your like perspective on that.
The benefit of the sort of streaming age is that people can watch something whenever they want at whatever pace they want. You could recommend something to me now and I could watch it on the way home on my phone, and that's kind of extraordinary. And it also means I think things have a long tail, right? And they sort of can get discovered years after the event, and nothing kind of disappears really, which is great. And so stuff is just out there waiting to be discovered, and that's wonderful. Like I say, when I was younger, either you saw a trailer and then you went to see it, or you saw that there was someone in it that you were a fan of. But it was much more curated in that sense. There were gatekeepers that kind of said, you might be interested in Blackadder. Oh, thank you very much. I shall give it a try. Whereas, like you say, nowadays people tend to depend a lot more, I think, on their friends and social media. But I think what's lost is the TV studios and networks and streamers just letting things breathe and finding their time with an audience. And I think particularly with sitcoms, they need to sort of bed in. You know, famously, Only Fools and Horses didn't catch fire straight away. Neither did Seinfeld. Neither did Cheers. You know, these kind of classic icons of sort of sitcom. The Simpsons, I think, was relatively slow. So it's just, you know, things need to kind of, sitcoms in particular, it's like they need to become part of the family. And then when Joey walks into the apartment in Friends, you're like excited, you know who he is, you know what he's gonna, you know, the sort of idiot thing he's gonna say. You're looking forward to it, you know. But it takes a little while for that to get its feet under your table, as it were.
To get that sort of familiarity with the dynamic. And
and if you abandon it too soon, that's right.
Yeah.
And if you abandon it too soon and it gets jettisoned after one series or something, it just never had that runway,
opportunity.
You know?
Exactly. I was saying to you that a recent example is Schitt's Creek, which I think people kept saying that it really found its flow in like season 5 maybe even, and it's like I don't know whether or not shows get an opportunity to get to a season 5. Often if they're not getting the ratings, then they're
and there
cancelled.
are shows which have sort of, you know, which have done sort of moderately well somewhere, and then all the episodes get put on, say, Netflix, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah.
And suddenly it has a whole second lease of life, or indeed the American version of The Office, which just found a whole, even more mammoth audience than it ever did on its original broadcast. Because suddenly there's like 200 episodes that people can just sit and watch. But again, if you haven't got 200 episodes, you don't get that opportunity. So yeah, you sort of have to give these things time to breathe.
And as you mentioned there, The Office, it was a slow burn. Famously, you got less views, I think, at the beginning than the women's balls. Is that?
It wasn't less views. It was they did a test screening.
Oh, okay.
They did a test screening for an audience, and it got the lowest score except for women's lawn bowls.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
And I didn't even know that was on TV. But yes.
Neither did a lot of people, apparently.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
There you are.
But obviously it became a huge global success. I mean, it has a 97 out of 100 Metacritic score.
Does it?
In 2019, The Guardian ranked it number 6 of the 100 best TV shows of the 21st century. I mean, it's huge.
Oh, we didn't make number 1. Interesting.
Bring that up.
Must try harder.
Yeah.
Did you feel a slight burden almost that it had been this huge success?
I just remember thinking that it had grown in a way that was going to be difficult to compete with. And so it's better to sort of just kind of go, just instead of trying to top it, kind of just go left or go right, or just go in a slightly different direction, rather than trying to top it, because even then I just thought that seemed impossible. And as its phenomenon has grown over the years, largely because of the American version, that's even more true, you know. Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, was asked, why have you never written anything as successful as Catch-22? And he said, who has? and it's slightly like that with The Office.
Yeah.
It's just, there are not many shows that have got that cultural purchase. And so to try and keep doing that every time is hard, would be hard to try and do. So I've deliberately tried to kind of just go in different directions and, you know, and not try and chase that high.
Yeah, fair enough. But it has resonated so deeply with so many people, and for me, I think it's slightly because it's such a kind of mundane setting, and it's so relatable. Like everyone's had an experience like that. It's so sort of like, it's kind of like finding the hilarious and often like the quite beautiful or slightly absurd in a very like ordinary setting. And I think that's something, even though you've gone off and done very different projects set in different things, that seems to sort of be a slight like line through your work.
Yes, I think in that case, what we noticed was that a lot of shows had been set in offices, but they weren't about offices. They were about funny people who happened to be working in a newspaper office or whatever. And this was about the minutiae of that office experience, which was particularly and it was particularly accurate at that time. I'm interested now. I would imagine office like culture has changed significantly, not just in terms of like the sort of PC and what David Brent could say, but even just like now I'm like, would Tim be able to pine for Dawn, or would he just be seen as a creep? You know, like would he have to go to the HR department and go, hey, I really fancy the receptionist. What are the rules about me asking her out? You know.
Yeah.
And so I think there's
Yeah.
just it would be different now, and
And
obviously
the work from home hybrid
from
as
home
well.
hybrid
People
and-
on
David
Zoom,
Brent on Zoom.
buffering.
yeah,
exactly.
So I think it would be different. But at that time, I think it was very accurate about that experience of office life, and that we'd spent a lot of time literally sitting and thinking about the observations that we wanted to check off the list. You know, the training day and the pub quiz and the things which we'd done in office life that we wanted to make sure we'd sort of observed. And I don't know that I've ever been that observational or forensic since, just because I've never come onto a territory that's been quite as rich as that. Because the office, at the time it was something like half the country worked in an office.
Yeah.
You know, and so it was such a universal subject, and there aren't many subjects that universal to set a comedy. But the specificity of a place or character, that I've always tried to hang on to. You know? And so I still feel it's important to be specific and give your characters specificity, even if you're not trying to sort of make the whole world relate to it. You want to give them a specificity. So like I did this wrestling film, Fighting With My Family, which was a real family based on a real family in Norwich. So that helped. But going up and hanging out with them and just seeing that dynamic and seeing this love they have for pro wrestling, something I was never interested in, but their passion for it was so intoxicating that they worshipped it. It had changed their lives. It had saved them from addiction and all sorts of things. And the idea of trying to capture their love of something, as for many people as weird as wrestling, that was that. And trying to keep it in Norwich and and trying to make them feel particular in the way that they really are, still felt important.
Sometimes the more specific something is, the more like universal
Absolutely.
it is in a weird paradoxical way.
I think it's somehow more relatable because there's a honesty to it, or there's an accuracy in the emotion of it that people relate to, even if they live in a very different world and come from a very different backdrop.
Totally. Yeah, because for me, I'm from Reading, so
a
lot of the work that you've done, like Cemetery Junction, obviously the offices in Slough, feels so specific to me, and I get every single niche reference, so it's incredibly satisfying to watch. But then you have someone who's on the other side of the world who's also appreciating it just as much. So would you say specificity is kind of the secret sauce really for writing?
Well, I do think if you try to do something too generalized and not that feels like detached from any real world or real place, I just think the audience, it feels inauthentic to them. They can't quite orientate themselves. Like, where is this supposed to be? You know what I mean? And so I do think there's a great value in specificity. Like you say, there's a universality to it that just feels right, even if you don't recognize the like again with Swingers, going back to Swingers, that was LA. I'd never been to LA. They were very much part of the kind of revival of like 50s swing music, that had happened at that time in LA, and they had a very specific dress sense. But the way they interacted as young men, and the way they gave each other crap and they goofed around, and the sort of way they, just their whole kind of way of being was completely relatable to someone in Bristol who had never been to LA and had never been swing dancing,
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I related to films that have had absolutely nothing to do with me when I was growing up.
Almost that you do relate so much.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Similar with The Outlaws as well, which is based in Bristol.
Yes.
What was it like eating an omelette with Christopher Walken, trying to get him on board? How did you sell?
Yes, that
Bristol?
wasn't a proviso of his. It wasn't like come and eat an omelette and I'll decide. But
omelette or nothing.
Yes. No, I went to see Christopher in his house in Connecticut, and I arrived, and it was a very cold sort of winter's day, and he welcomed me in, and I can't do an impression of Chris, but he said something like, would you like some omelette? And I was like, okay,
sure,
great. And he'd made it himself, and I was like, great.
Oh, really?
And I ate about half this omelette, and then we talked for so long about the project that in the end, after about 2.5 hours, I was like, Chris, any more of that omelette? I'm starving here, mate. And he has subsequently said that me eating and not wanting a seconds was a deciding factor. On wanting to
That's the lesson to learn here, as always,
exactly.
eat the omelette.
Eat the omelette.
You have to eat the omelette.
You should have a T-shirt that just says eat the omelette.
Did you write that character specifically with him in mind, or after the fact did you think, okay, let's...
No, I didn't write it specifically with him in mind, but once he signed on, then I sort of tweaked it to try and, dial it more to him but Chris was sort of very keen for me to not change it too much, to try and write in his voice, to sort of let him do that side of things. So although the character was written as an American, I didn't try and put in pauses to make him speak in that very Christopher Walken way.
Yeah, I imagine he took care of that himself.
He did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. The other thing I'm quite interested in asking you about is like constraints in writing, because obviously often with like independent filmmaking it's very low budgets, and sometimes I think those constraints can actually like help the writing. Is that something that you found in your work, and if so, how did you keep that feeling in your work as the budgets went up and you had a bit more freedom?
Well, no one's ever given me a giant budget, where it's
Sure.
sort of I could just run amok with,
Fair enough.
I brought Chris Walken to Bristol, and I've never brought Godzilla to Bristol. Tearing down the suspension bridge could be quite exciting. So
I'm sold.
I know,
Yeah.
really good, isn't it? And all like just local people. Bloody hell, it's bloody Godzilla! Look out! So I've never had that kind of budget, but with the Outlaws, I tried to be more ambitious, just in terms of the number of characters, and it had some sort of action and some, but I've never worked on anything, even as an actor, on someone else's project where money wasn't a constraint.
Yeah.
Because even when you go to bigger budget things, there's still not enough money for the ambition of the bigger budget project. So unless you're Tom Cruise, who can just keep making Mission Impossible for like 6 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's a completely unique situation. There's almost no budget that anyone's ever happy with.
Right. Yeah.
But obviously in a low budget independent film, it's even more noticeable and even more tangible. And so I do think it's sort of knowing what the constraints are, and making an asset of them. I mean, I'm trying to think of. There's always been occasions where someone said to me, "We can't afford to do this thing you've written," and so you have to go back to the script, and if you're imaginative enough, and you rewrite it. Sometimes it does open up something else.
Yeah.
Creatively, that perhaps you hadn't imagined. And so it instead of sort of fighting them, sometimes it's like, well, how can I work with this? The famous example that is not from my work but is in Rocky, where Rocky takes Adrian to the ice rink to go skating around the ice rink, and they have this very sweet kind of sequence where they skate in an empty ice rink, and he kind of is chatting and she's sort of very shy, and it's very sweet. And famously, that was originally scripted as having a whole bunch of other ice skaters, people who were out ice skating, and they were amongst, a Saturday night ice skating mob.
And
they said, we can't afford it. And so he rewrote it so he bribes the guy to let them in, and they have a solo ice skate, which is so much more sweet and romantic. And it's kind of like this schlubby guy, like trying to find something special to impress this girl, And that's a great example, I think, of where it's become more magical because of that constraint.
We're briefly interrupting this programme to let you know that your favourite cinema needs you.
This year, BIFA have launched the inaugural Cinema of the Year award, supported by Kia and decided by you.
Nothing beats that feeling of watching a brilliant film on the big screen, and we want to celebrate the cinemas that allow us to do just that. Cinemas at the heart of their communities that bring audiences together and champion independent film.
Voting is now open for cinema goers to decide the nominees for the Cinema of the Year. So if you love your local cinema, now is your chance to prove it.
Head to the show notes of this episode for the link to cast your vote, and tune in to BIFA's social media on Monday 3rd of November to find out all the nominees for BIFA 2025. any sort of big differences you found between writing for TV and writing your own feature films?
Well, the pleasure of TV is you have longer to sit in the world with these characters.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I mentioned earlier, because the hope is you have at least 2 series. And so you don't have to tell every story and every aspect of these people straight off the bat. You know, you can let it breathe a bit more. A small premise goes a long way in a sitcom episode, for instance. You know, you can have a very a pub quiz is almost enough to carry an episode of TV.
Mm-hmm.
When it gets to like an hour, it's slightly different. You need more plot then, but certainly a half-hour comedy. But you could be a bit more leisurely, like you can have a slow burn romance, you know, over multiple seasons, which when the characters finally consummate it, is very exciting for people because they've invested in this relationship. And we did it in The Office, but it's in Friends. And one of my favorite shows when I was younger was a show called Northern Exposure, which slightly forgotten now, but that had a sort of simmering will they won't they romance in it, which was just beautifully done for multiple seasons. And you can also take digressions in TV. You know, you can take a digression and follow a secondary character for an episode, or you know, you can spend a whole episode that's a flashback. Whereas a screenplay, on the whole, is just a lot more focused.
Mm-hmm.
It's normally focused on one protagonist, generally less of an ensemble thing. You do find them, but they're not as common. And what I found is, particularly at test screenings, if you have any kind of digression, anything that's not sort of on point with the story, the audience feels restless. It's like why is this? Why are you telling me this? Why are we spending time with this person now? Why are we sitting in this scene? And you have a little bit more freedom, I think, in independent cinema, where the audience is perhaps not necessarily expecting such a tight narrative, but certainly in anything which has a more, if you like, traditional narrative style, the audience they don't even know why. They can just sense, and so you can feel their energy sagging or their interest waning slightly.
Do you think that's always been the case, or do you think that's happened more as audiences become more restless generally because we're used to having, you know, multiple screens?
I think possibly it's got worse in that sense, but I still think if you look at even kind of classic, like if you look at a movie like Casablanca, it's a very tight movie. It's like probably 85-90 minutes. It's not much, and it moves at a pace, you know. It doesn't, and those films from that period, maybe because they just didn't screen films, they didn't make films on the whole that were longer, they move at a lick. They don't sit around just sort of idling, you know. Even a film like Jaws, you know, from 1974, it's like, you know, again, there's not much there's dead people, but there's not much, there's not like a lot of dead space in the film, a lot of dead air, you know what I mean? It's pacey, and you know, he famously would shoot like that extra shock of the dead body underwater. You know, he shot that in a swimming pool or something because he felt he needed another shock, you know, at that moment in the movie. So he obviously watched it with audiences and felt there was a dip in that moment. So I think it's always been there.
I wanted to ask a bit about comedy movies. I think I grew up in a time where like big budget comedy movies were like massive, like Superbad and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then that seemed to sort of go away for a while and is maybe like trickling back a bit. But how do you feel about like the big comedy movie? Do you think it's like coming back? Do you think it should come back?
Well, I think what happened was, as with so much cinema, it was economics. You know, people weren't going to see comedies.
Yeah.
In the cinema because they were finding equivalents on TV. They had multiple TV choices, and TV became known as the home of comedy, you know, particularly once streaming happened. Like I say, you can watch 200 episodes of the Office or whatever, so why are you schlepping out to the cinema to see it? It didn't feel enough of an event. And people probably forgot that the pleasure of watching Superbad or Bridesmaids in the cinema with a shared group, you know. I remember seeing The 40-Year-Old Virgin when Steve Carell has the hair ripped off. I mean, people were losing their minds in the cinema, you know. It's joyous. And it's never going to be the same at home. You're never going to be quite as giddy when it's not shared in that way. So I don't know, maybe it was a kind of, you know, the pandemic, you know, that was, and so maybe they will find their way back. It would be nice to think that they did, and people kind of re-found that pleasure.
Do you have a favourite cinema currently?
Well, I mean, I hate to sound gauche, but my favourite cinema is my home cinema.
Yes.
So I have like a proper one made,
Whoa, what's the setup?
Oh my god, that's so
it's
cool.
like I mean, I've done it. I've sort of tried to evoke the kind of cinemas I remember from my youth.
Okay.
Nice.
So a lot of sort of red material and low light and just the whole vibe that you'd expect.
And the
my God.
popcorn as well. Like, do you have
Well,
all of the?
Here's where we differ
Okay.
between me and almost everybody else, which there's no eating in my cinema.
None at all.
No. A couple of reasons. One, you're not getting your greasy popcorn fingers on my expensive upholstery,
Completely fair enough.
which is fair enough.
Yeah.
And secondly, I've even when I was young, I've never been very tolerant of eating in the cinema. I just
get
don't know
it.
why we're chowing down popcorn and nachos when I'm trying to listen to the film.
No, I totally get
It always bothers me,
Yeah.
even now. So I'm a bit ruthless about that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I don't
Nice.
want to like go against things that I've said previously on the podcast, but I actually have misophonia, which is like when you're like
noise.
sensitive to noise.
Yes.
So it really puts me off when people are like really chomping down on things. It's all I can think about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I back you on the no food, no beverages.
And I understand that a lot of cinemas are making their margins by now serving food in the cinema. At least you used to have to buy it in the lobby and bring it in. Now they're bringing it to your seat.
I know.
Yeah,
For
I know.
it
goodness
is
sake.
wild.
Full meals. I mean,
Yeah. Who are we?
Tim Key.
Yeah, we
was
talked to
saying
Tim Key and he said he went to see
The Zone of Interest.
The Zone of Interest and somebody ate 2 hamburgers during it and he was like, of
Yes.
all the
It's like
films
outrageous.
to
Yes.
eat 2 hamburgers to, Zone of Interest is
well, it's
an
funny you should say that
interesting
because
choice.
I went to see I, Daniel Blake, which famously
yeah.
has that scene where she's so
In the food
desperate that
bank.
she eats that food in the food bank.
Yeah.
There was someone there eating a sort of gourmet kind of mezze platter during that, kind of watching it, going, oh yeah, this is a real problem in the UK. And dipping their hummus and their pita bread. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Oh,
That's
exactly as it was intended. I'm
sure,
sure by
yeah.
Ken Loach. Yeah.
yeah. Loach must be fuming if he heard that. Are there any moments or big scenes that you've watched over the years that you think, I'm so glad I saw this in the cinema?
I think it's one of the reasons I think horror has remained perennially popular, isn't it? It's like comedy. I think it's particularly effective in the cinema. And I mentioned earlier Scream. I remember when Scream came out, and that was a real joy because the ironic commentary on the very kind of film we were watching felt very fresh, and it also had the jump scares. And I remember the audience really kind of going crazy for that. But there's been experiences I have. I remember going to, I think it was Fast 5. I think it was Fast and the Furious 5.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 2 women sat next to me who loved it. And they were all the way through. They were just with every swerve of the cars and every crash. They were, they were so into it. And at the end, we were all leaving and I was following. And there was a post-credit, I think it's Fast 5, there was a post-credit scene where I think Dwayne Johnson kind of is in like his CIA or FBI headquarters and he picks up something and it reveals that a previous character who'd been killed off is still alive. And these women went, they were like, what? What? Oh my God. They were like hugging each other. They were so blown away. And I was loving it. I was just, this is fantastic. I was loving they were so invested in the Fast movies.
Oh my God,
it was a delight. And you'd never, I mean, I'm equally excited at home, but I mean, I'm not, there's no one there to share it with.
Yeah, you're screaming into
Yeah.
an empty room.
Yeah.
You mentioned Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson there, and can you tell us a bit about working with him on Fighting With My Family?
Because he pitched the story to you, is that correct? Was it maybe even on that Fast film? Because he was
It
in
might have
the
been,
UK.
actually. Yes,
Yeah.
it was one of the Fast films. He was in the UK and he was apparently watching Channel 4, which is such a lovely image of Dwayne
I know.
sitting in
love
his
that.
in his travel lodge, with his little cup of tea and
Yeah.
shortbread.
Watching One Time With Me.
Yeah, and he's watching Channel 4. Like
That's how we.
he never misses dispatches.
Yeah.
And anyway, this documentary came on called Fighting With My Family about this real family of Norwich wrestlers. And as a former wrestler himself, he was just completely enthralled. And so he could sense that there was something in it that had a real life kind of Rocky aspect to it. And he became acquainted with the family, and particularly this girl Paige, who was the sort of breakout star of the family. and so I became kind of involved with their story very loosely. And so, yeah, we'd worked together on something before, a movie called The Tooth Fairy.
Yes.
You're welcome. And
Thank you for your work.
yeah, and so yeah, we spoke about it, and I watched it, and like I said, never had any interest in wrestling, but just was completely enthralled by this family and their love of it. And it could have been they could have been musicians, they could have been a family of, of sculptors, whatever. It was just the fact they cared so much.
I know, yeah.
And they were, all of their emotional well-being was invested in whether their kids made it into the WWE.
Yeah, and then it's the fact that she makes it and he doesn't.
Which is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah, and Florence Pugh, because that must have been a huge year for her, because I know that's 2019 and Little Women came out the same year. What was it like directing her?
Well, I mean, Florence was like, she just auditioned with a lot of other talented young actors, but she's was obviously is brilliant and was great, and committed to it 100%. And she and Jack Loudon, who played her brother, were just did the training and learned as many moves as they could.
So good.
And Florence just was one of those actors, which is the best kind, which is just gets on with it, just does the bloody work really well, and it's not not kind of questioning endlessly the script, or she's just has creative thoughts and input, but just did great work every day, and it's just that's a pleasure. And I mean, kind of fearless as well. I mean, we were talking earlier about constraints, financial and budgetary constraints, and that was a low budget film despite Dwayne's involvement, and it came out of Film 4, and we managed to get we had this big sort of finale wrestling match, which was in a stadium.
Yeah, it looks huge.
It was huge.
Yeah.
And so the WWE themselves they said we could come into a stadium gig and film for an hour after their regular TV broadcast.
Right.
And they would try and keep the audience back for us so that we'd have people in the stands,
Okay.
And so Dwayne went down very kindly and sort of emceed it. So he came on after the regular match had finished, and of course when he walks on, it's like Elvis has come back to life. Like people go mad, and I couldn't get him out of the ring. He was on there for 20 minutes. And I'm like, we've only got an hour, Dwayne.
Come on, wrap it up.
Yeah, and so but so Florence was backstage, and we sort of rehearsed this sequence, and I was nervous for her because we only had this short amount of time, and there was like 20,000 people or whatever in this stadium in LA, and Florence, cool as a cucumber.
Really?
And then we played the real girl's entry music, and she hadn't wrestled for a while. So the audience, despite the fact Dwayne had explained clearly we were shooting a movie, they thought it was going to be the real girl who came out.
Right.
So when Florence came out, who by that point was not a star, they're like, we don't know who this woman is. Why has she come out dressed like this? But they kind of were cheering, okay. Then she got in the ring. She did a few moves. They're like, yeah, but there's some bigger moves she couldn't do.
Right.
So a stunt woman had to do those. So Florence had to step aside and let the stunt woman do it. And now they're just completely bamboozled. They're like, I don't understand what's happening. Why isn't she doing the moves? And then they just started getting, and Florence said at one point she got landed on the mat and she just looked out and she just saw some kid going, "You suck." And but it didn't throw her. She just kept going. I was the one sweating and panicking. And, are we getting the right footage and all the rest of it? But it was brutal.
I wonder if she just wakes up in a cold sweat looking at the kid's face like, "You suck."
Yeah,
I would.
That would stay with me.
Amazing,
for sure.
Yeah.
And then,
That's amazing.
What was it like watching that film with the family that inspired it?
Well, I didn't watch it with the family. I screened it for them, but I didn't sit in the room with them because I just thought that would be too weird.
Sure.
So I let them come in and I left them to it, and then they came out. They were very emotional and they were very touched. And then Paige was in Florida, so I took it there to show her, and again left her, and she was texting me sort of saying, "I don't want to come out because I'm crying," and so it was very sweet. And I think they were very, and they'd been through a lot, and she'd been through a lot, so I think it was very meaningful for them. And that's the thing is, it's a real story with real people, and you feel a responsibility to them. Absolutely. And you don't want to kind of sugarcoat everything, but at the same time, you don't, you do feel like these are real people and you're documenting their lives in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you did such a great job with it, and it is so funny, but it does really hit in those kind of heartwarming
I'm very pleased because I think the ending is very strong, and I think it works well, and that was thanks in part to test audiences just telling me what wasn't working, not necessarily verbally, but just watching it with them and realizing a few things I needed to change. But I remember I did a screening and someone came up to me and they went, you know, I don't understand how, I can't believe you made me cry at the end, you know. And then I've sort of other people were a bit snobbish. They were like, well, I don't understand why I was crying at the end. It's like I'd made a mistake. Like somehow that wasn't my plan to move you emotionally.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, this is not what I signed up for.
You made me have a reaction to your
exactly.
art.
Yes, yeah.
I love the scene of the family all at the dinner table. It's
Right,
so good.
right, yeah.
It's all,
Well, thank you. Yeah.
The
Well, it's
writing's
interesting.
so
Like I was saying
quick.
about the test screening thing. What was interesting there was that so in the wrestling community, I don't think I'm giving too much away, but they'll often be told who's going to win a particular match.
Mhm.
Right, yeah.
Right. So the performers will be told who's going to win, you know. And so Dwayne in real life had told Paige she was going to win this particular match. It's what they call going over with the, you know. And so so we dramatized that. We filmed the sequence where Dwayne tells Florence, you're going to win the match. Because the point about the ending of the movie was supposed to be, it's not does she win the match, it's does she win over the crowd.
Yeah.
Because in wrestling it's all about can you win the crowd over and then you become loved forever, you know. And so that was what it was about, that was going to be the victory. Unlike Rocky, where it's like, will he win the boxing match? And also because people know that wrestling's kind of artificial, we thought, well, they're not going to invest in this match which they know is staged.
Yeah.
So we screened it for the audience with that in, and their audience was like, we didn't want to know how it was going to play out. We didn't want to know if she won or lost.
Right.
We wanted to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, thanks very much. We'll take that scene out.
Cool.
Boom, you know.
Sorted.
And now, of course, then they're much more invested, even though it's artificial.
Yeah.
They get swept up in it, just like you do if you're at a real wrestling match.
Yeah,
you know.
totally. I think I felt that in the moment, to be honest.
Yeah.
I was like, will they?
Will she? Will she?
Will she?
Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. I had such a fun time with that movie. It's great.
One thing we'd love to ask you, is we talked a bit about the sort of genesis of some of your TV work earlier and making the short film that sort of became The Office. And you said you had the arrogance of youth handing in something that was a bit different to like what you were briefed to make. But obviously that paid off so well. Do you have you must have had quite a lot of self-belief to like push that through and hand something in different to the BBC than maybe they were expecting. Do you have advice for sort of filmmakers at that position as they're sort of trying to break in? What would be your big bit of advice? Because I'm sure a lot of people would want to know, given your success.
The great thing about that period was I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what I mean by the arrogance of youth. It's that you just assume. It's like you come, like I studied film at university, but not as a practical filmmaker particularly, more just academically. So I came out, and in my early 20s, I was like, I could make a film. I could make a film, yeah. Do it tomorrow. It'll be better than all this crap that I'm watching. And then you actually try and make one, and it's really hard.
Yeah.
And you just don't know how quickly the time goes and how quickly the money goes and how all these beautiful sunset shots you'd imagined aren't going to happen because there is no sun. It's overcast and grey and bleak and rainy and
and you're
whatever,
in Slough.
and you're running out of time and whatever it is, and the actors, don't know their lines or whatever. There's a Kurosawa quote I read once where he said something like, someone said, why is this particular shot framed in this way with the beautiful this there and da-da-da. And he said, because if you panned an inch that way, you'd see a gas station, and an inch that way, you'd see like a tower block.
Yeah.
And it's like sometimes it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
It's like you're just trying to avoid the tower blocks and the gas stations. And so that's the biggest thing I learned was, I just don't know as much as I think I do.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also a superpower. Because it means that you just kind of go in, and you should go in if you're young and starting out, like you can do anything, and you're invincible, and just do the thing that you want to do the thing that you want to see, because you only get a chance to make your first thing once, and then if it's good, you're always living off the back of that, or living up to it, or failing to live up to it, or whatever. It's like the band that makes the great first album and then they have the difficult second album, right? You get that chance to make that first thing completely on your terms. So yeah, throw everything in the mix. Don't try and second guess what someone will want or what that will sell, or it doesn't mean you're not trying to keep one eye on the audience, but that it's just do what you want it to be. And we were very dogmatic about that on The Office, just we saturated the colour out of it because we wanted it to look like it had been sat on the shelf at the BBC for years, and someone had stuck it on randomly. Like, we need to fill up half an hour. Let's throw this documentary on we never aired. You know what I mean? And kind of we made it slower than it should have been, just so you sort of sat in the drudgery or the silence of that office. You know, which are things you probably would never do now, because you'd think, got to keep it pacey. You know, you're one eye on the audience, you know, so but you didn't know any of those things about, you know, the impatience of a TV audience, you didn't know anything about test screenings or anything like that. So you just did what felt kind of right, you know, in the moment.
Yeah, and ignorance is kind of bliss in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
if you knew the task ahead of you, then it would maybe like fill you with too much fear to actually do the thing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's much, much harder now. When I go into projects now, I'm much more stressed than I ever was on The Office, because I know what's coming.
Yeah. Right.
You
Exactly.
know, I know what's coming down the pipe.
You know what you're getting yourself in for. Yeah. And a lot of people cite your work as an inspiration for them going into comedy or writing or filmmaking. Can I ask who's inspiring you now?
Well, I don't watch as much TV or film as I used to, despite the home cinema. That's the third mention of that. Of late, I've just been partly because I had to move out of the house because we were doing some renovation, but also I've been working on a number of projects, and I've been doing a lot of stand-up. I've been building a stand-up act, and so that tends to happen at night. So I don't, which is normally when I would watch stuff. So I don't.
Right.
And then when I'm in the daytime, if I'm writing, I tend not to try and watch things. Like particularly comedy, if I'm doing comedy, because I don't want to be influenced or accidentally, you know, sometimes I feel like a joke.
Plagiarize, you know,
whatever. So so I just have not consumed as much. But the things one thing I have noticed, I'm really looking forward to. Is it the movie Weapons that's just come out?
We were just talking about it.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's incredible.
It's incredible. And what I like about, say, someone like, I think his name's Zach Krieger, and I enjoyed his previous film, Barbarian.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called? Yeah. And you see it a lot, I think, in horror at the moment. Long Legs and stuff. It's just people doing really kind of audacious stuff in that horror space, because it's one of the few guaranteed sort of low-budget theatrical releases is a horror. Often they'll put out. It's low budget, doesn't need stars, and you can be a lot more experimental. And I'm really enjoying seeing. And although horror's not I'm not a huge fan of horror. I just like what these imaginative filmmakers are doing with that. And I think that's always been the case, but for some reason it's particularly, I don't know, caught my attention lately. And even at the more extreme end, at the high budget end with like Sinners, you know, again, where it's just that you're just like, even if it's just like your favourite film, it's like, I've got to give him a round of applause for making a movie with like 3 or 4 movies in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like a gangster and a vampire thing and a musical, like mash them all up and bring it out. Yes, absolutely. Like, go for it. You know?
I'm trying to think of a more intellectual version of the phrase in my head, which is balls to the wall.
It is balls to the wall. I agree. It's great. I love it. Yeah.
Nice.
And it's great that audiences are responding to that as well, and you know, and appreciating it.
Yeah, people crave that kind of creativity and fresh IP, I think. Yeah.
Can we ask one final question, which is, do you have a favourite British independent film that you would recommend everyone to see?
Well, I really loved After Sun.
Yes,
so
nice.
I just thought it was excellent. It was really brilliant. In fact, I just had to give a contribution to the New York Times list of sort of best films of the last, since I think 2000, I think, and that was on my list because I just thought it was really wonderful and just like pure cinema. You know, like almost kind of difficult to just describe it really. You know, it's not that you could just sit and kind of spell out the plot or easily define the characters. It just had, well, as you know, just that wonderful, it just felt like it felt personal and kind of poetic and sort of and the sense of place and the sort of, it was kind of elliptical and really, really extraordinary piece of work.
Yeah, definitely. Still heartbroken.
Yeah.
Oh,
After
absolutely.
the end of that. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you. It was
It's
so
been
lovely to
amazing.
chat to you.
Thank you.
Really
Thanks
was
so
an
much,
honour to
guys.
meet you.
Cheers.
So thank you. Thanks for listening to the BIFA podcast, supported by Kia. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to get new episodes as they land. And please tell all of your friends about the podcast to help spread the word. We want all the film fans to be able to find us.
The BIFA podcast is supported by Kia. The hosts are Karis, Aldridge and Joy Hunter. The show is produced by Daniel Aldridge and Kat Butterfield for Audacious Productions and Joy Hunter for BIFA. The assistant producer is Bruno Atkinson. Director of photography is Louis Hudd and Jude O'Connor. Audio engineers are Nathan Cooper and James Gibbons McGregor. Filmed at Fiction Studios. Special thanks to the BIFA team.